Hey folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Let's discuss Moon square Venus in the birth or natal chart. As usual, when discussing these aspects, we cover just a bit of astrological ground first to sort of warm up our astrological brain. So we're dealing with two psychological functions here, or let's say two dimensions of the psyche, the Moon and Venus. And with the square, they are bound together in a specific dynamic or energy flow, the square. But before we unpack that, we can begin by noting that by virtue of two planets being linked together by aspect, it means that two psychological functions are linked together in the individual's wiring or makeup. So if the Moon is linked to Venus by aspect, it means that to execute your Moon, to fulfill the needs of your Moon, Venus is also invoked. In other words, someone with the Moon in aspect to Venus cannot do their Moon without also invoking the Venus within them. So Venus is necessary to the fulfillment of the Moon's needs, the lunar needs in the chart. Now, when we are talking about the Moon, we are talking about a specific psychological function. And to sort of recap, the Moon, along with its aspects, represents our core psychological needs across the board. The reigning psychological needs across the board, the conditions under which we find emotional equilibrium, the conditions under which we find a sense of safety, security, and comfort. So the Moon in the natal chart, the entire lunar complex, the sign, the house, the aspects, the declination, describe the central conditions that someone needs across the board to feel safe and comfortable. So the Moon complex, or the lunar complex in the chart, describes the characteristic way that a person reacts and responds to all sorts of stimuli. So the Moon and the entire lunar complex describe an individual's inner temperament and baseline mood throughout their entire lives. The Moon and the lunar complex describe our subjective experience of childhood, the family, the mother, how we were parented. The Moon is really a deep repository of past experience, a psychic pool of accumulated energy imprints, emotional energy imprints, a sort of psychic basin, if you will. So what has been absorbed into the emotional body. So the Moon also speaks to our nurturing function, the instinctual way in which we nurture. Now, with Venus, whenever we see Venus in the chart, we are invoking two sets of matrices, essentially. The Venus-Taurus matrix, our attitudes to resources, how we gain resources, our sense of worth and value, our needs for sensual pleasure and enjoyment, yes? And we also invoke the Venus-Libra matrix, which speaks to our relational style, how we establish relationships, what we are attracted to in relationships, and our relationship needs, how we express affection and love, how we understand affection and love, our aesthetic values, our needs to beautify and to express ourselves artistically. Now, when we look at the Moon and Venus, we see two facets of the psyche that have to do with our inner emotional needs, our inner emotional and relational needs, beliefs, and experiences, the nature of the aspect, and more importantly, the state of our own personal evolution and awareness will condition how we experience these two dimensions of our being. The nature of the aspect and the state of our own personal awareness and consciousness will determine the nature of the dialogue between our Moon and our Venus. And aspects are just that. A dialogue between specific parts of the psyche, specific facets of the psyche, a dialogue between parts of our being, a dialogue between two psychological functions or faculties, yes? So when we speak about squares, we are invoking a few ideas. One is the idea that the planets in question, the psychological faculties in question, have to do more work to resolve their relationship with each other. So more work is required to allow these functions to work in a state of constructive harmony to overcome the resistance to each other. That's the nature of the square. When we speak about squares, we are invoking the idea of a dynamic state of internal tension that needs to be released or resolved in some kind of way. And opening squares, as I've said time and time again, regardless of the signs that they are in, often have a Cancerian subtone or undertone. Why? When we look at the zodiac, that wheel that contains within it all of the archetypal relationships within astrology, we see that Cancer represents the opening 90 degrees, the opening square from the Aries 0 point. So likewise, we often notice that closing squares, regardless of which signs the planets are in, often have a Capricornian sort of subtone or undertone. Why? Because when we look at the zodiac, which contains the inner logic of all the aspects as denoting a series of archetypal relationships, we see that Capricorn represents the closing 90 degrees, the closing square, from the Aries 0 point. So this sort of understanding deepens and sharpens our appreciation of the different tones of squares and how squares can show up in the natal chart. So not all squares are equal in tone or character. So Cancerian squares, opening squares, often have a more inhibited character where there is this sort of inhibited emotional energy or difficulties with the appropriateness of emotional response. Now, Capricornian squares, closing squares, are often bound up with states of fear, fear of failure, or the need to release energy through effort and work. Capricornian things. So with squares, we also have this dynamic of too much or too little. So going overboard with a certain tendency or expression or doing too little of something. Yes? So let me just say before we go on that I'm about to put out a 2-hour audio class on aspects. It will be a very meaty audio class on aspects. We're going to go really in depth to the core to come up with a sort of core deep understanding of aspects at various layers, and I'm really excited about putting this up, and it will be up in the store section of my website taranikita.com. I've been promising to have this up for a while now, but it's all recorded and I'm doing the editing. I haven't done everything as yet because I am essentially a one-woman shop. I'm doing everything along with my usual workload, so I'm aiming to have this class along with a couple others on my website up in about 2 weeks. So if you're interested, you can certainly look out for that. And when I put the recordings up, I will also update the description box with the link to the store. And of course, you may want to join my email list to kind of keep updated with that if you choose. All right, so having covered some ground here first, let's dive into now unpacking natal moon square Venus. Now, because the moon is linked to Venus, with this aspect, there are often strong inner needs, that's the moon, for relating to others, that's Venus. But the square here often indicates where there is the subjective experience that the emotional needs in relationships are not met, or that it is challenging or difficult for the core emotional needs for safety and security, that's the moon, to be met in the context of relationships, that's Venus. So the person may have a belief, an inner belief, that these emotional needs cannot be satisfied in the context of a relationship. So we may see with moon square Venus that such a person may resist their needs, that's the moon, for emotional connection and sharing, that's Venus, or emotional connection and relating, that's Venus. And this sort of resistance may not necessarily be something that is operating on a conscious level. With the moon, we are dealing with almost pre-conscious or habitual reactions or responses, kind of pre-conscious, subconscious, habitual responses and reactions. So there can sort of be an underlying dynamic here where on some level there is a resistance to closeness or emotional connection, perhaps out of fear that if the person connects, they won't have their emotional needs met, or there is an underlying feeling or belief rather, which says that I am not worthy of love, attention, or affection. Again, we're seeing the Venus-Taurus matrix here in terms of questions of worthiness. And once again, the thing to understand here is that when the moon and Venus are together, it means that Venus is important to how the moon's needs are fulfilled. Remember, the moon represents the core, reigning psychological needs across the board, showing up in all areas and realms, all arenas, all areas, all realms of our life experience. So the moon square Venus person may have strong inner needs, strong lunar needs for connection and relating, because of the fact that the moon is linked to Venus in the psyche. But the square aspect here describes beliefs and experiences that challenge the fulfillment of those inner needs. So you can often find with moon square Venus people that they are resisting the very thing that they need in order to be fulfilled. Yeah? They are resisting emotional connection and closeness when that is what they desperately need on an inner level for inward equilibrium. Yes? So with the moon and Venus brought into a relationship by aspect, one expression of this is that an individual's inner safety and security needs, as symbolized by the moon, are tied to relationships, and these inner safety and security needs are also tied to the need for establishing and maintaining relational harmony, and all of that is of course symbolized by Venus. So with the square here, some useful questions are: is my inner equilibrium tied too much to what other people think of me? Am I overly invested in being liked, that's Venus, for me to feel a sense of safety? Key questions. So one of the problematical expressions that we often see with moon square Venus is that because the inner sense, or the sense of inner security, that's the moon, is linked with establishing and maintaining a sense of harmony, relational harmony, that's Venus, there is this inner need to preserve harmony at all costs, which can manifest as characteristically people-pleasing behavior and a sort of passivity. Yes? And a sub-dynamic of this is that the inner emotional needs, that's the moon, are sacrificed, or let's say even bottled up, and remain unfulfilled because of the need to be nice, or to be received well by others, that's Venus. So the person has a subjective experience of not being able to satisfy both their moon and their Venus at the same time. So I can't have my inner needs met and maintain connection and relational harmony. Yeah. So relational harmony comes at the expense of my inner needs. So if I'm true to my inner needs, I won't have friends. If I have friends and relationships, I have to give up my core needs. So that's the sort of dynamic here. So people with the moon square Venus, or perhaps with any moon Venus aspect, the major ones, these people have to be really honest about how their core emotional needs are stacking up with their need to be in relationships. They have to be honest about the sorts of distortions that are occurring in terms of how they are really showing up in relationships. And that's the sort of thing with the moon that can make it so challenging. It can sort of be a distorting, reflective mirror. Yeah. So you often find that moon square Venus people are not really even clear about the actual nature of the dynamics between themselves and their emotional needs and how they are showing up in relationships. And this is what makes astrology, when practiced with enough sensitivity and know-how, such a powerful tool. So by contemplating the aspects in our chart, we can begin to see things a little bit more objectively. We can begin to see our individual intrapsychic dynamics with a little bit more objectivity. Yeah, and this is especially helpful in relation to the moon and the lunar needs, which are hard to get more of an objective perspective of, because the moon and the lunar complex represent our inner instinctual needs and habitual reaction patterns. So there's always something pre-conscious and subconscious about the moon and the lunar complex within anyone's chart, making it more challenging to get that objective perspective. Yeah. So again, with the moon square Venus, we have to be especially mindful of the problems that can occur when the inner self-image, as symbolized by the moon, when that's tied to what other people think of us. That's Venus. So with the moon square Venus, we can also witness a certain set of dynamics. One is distortion of the inner self-image through or because of the input of woman or the mother. That is the question of what was reflected back to us from the mother, the parents, the childhood experience. That's the moon, in terms of how we value ourselves. That's Venus. So we can also witness internalizing, that's the moon, negative self-limiting beliefs about one's femininity, or having a distorted inner sense of one's femininity, or resisting that, or having a problematical relationship with it. We can also witness problematic needs around beauty, how beautiful one thinks one is, and a fear of not measuring up to a certain standard of beauty. And these sorts of core fears can result in the symptomatic behavior of being excessively vain or superficial, for example. Underneath the excessive vanity or superficiality, underneath the extreme needs to measure up with a certain standard of beauty, underneath all of that are core fears around worthiness, again plugging us back into the Venus-Taurus matrix. So with this aspect, moon square Venus, we have to look at examining our relationship to beauty, to self-worth and femininity, something that is definitely compounded by and made more complex by our modern culture and the centrality of the image, and how all of that pertains in relation to women. With the moon square Venus, we can also see that there are strong needs for pleasure and sensual gratification. Now, we can have two sets of responses here that are actually both in keeping with the nature of the square, its tones and manifestations. Now, on the one hand, we can have someone who goes overboard in terms of fulfilling and satisfying needs for pleasure and sensual gratification, overindulgence. So this can be experienced as problematically excessive. On the other hand, we can have someone whose needs for pleasure and sensual enjoyment are linked to the fulfillment of their lunar needs, but they are denying and resisting and are out of touch with their inner needs for pleasure. So again, that too much, too little dynamic. Either I am overindulging, or I am resisting the part of me that needs pleasure and sensual gratification to fulfill my inner lunar needs. Yeah. With the moon square Venus, we can also see that inner safety and security needs, as symbolized by the moon, are tied up with resources and acquisition. That's Venus, the Venus-Taurus matrix. So there are a few ways in which we can see this play out in keeping with the dynamic of the square. The first is just this very strong emphasis within the personality on issues of safety and security. Both the moon and Venus, in their distinct ways, have to do with this idea of safety and security. So with the moon, we're talking about the conditions under which we feel emotionally safe across the board. And with Venus, we invoke the idea of the feelings of security and safety that arise when we have our material and resource needs met, in keeping with the Venus-Taurus matrix. So when this emphasis on safety and security becomes excessive, we see the problematical expressions of this, which the square can certainly symbolize. The constant need for things and objects, the inner sense of self being tied to what you have, to what you own, hoarding, the need for more and more stuff, equating your inner sense of self-worth with how much money you have, being superficial, so all of those things. Alright, so with Moon-Venus interchanges, we often see that there are strong needs to connect with or express beauty or artistry. We often see a strong artistic and aesthetic sense, so we can find that with the Moon square Venus, there are strong needs to express beauty, to express art, and to express the aesthetic sense. And we can find that the person works hard, that's the square, in order to express these needs for beauty and for artistry. With the Capricornian tone of some squares, we may witness that an individual needs to tangibly achieve and accomplish something which allows them to express their needs for beauty and creativity, Venus. Now, finally, when the moon is tied to Venus, we can witness that there are strong urges to protect, that's the moon, those with whom you are in a relationship, that's Venus, and that the protective and nurturing qualities, that's the moon, are activated and brought into focus when the individual is in relational context, that's Venus. And while this can be well-intentioned, it can become problematic, in keeping with the nature of the square, when it isn't appropriate to play the mother role or the protector in certain relationship contexts. Alright, so these are a few things to help to get you thinking about Moon square Venus. Of course, if you'd like some help in unpacking the Moon Venus in your own natal chart, I'm available as usual for astrological counseling consultations, which can be found on my website, taranikita.com. Links are in the description box below. All right, folks, so hope this was helpful, and until next time, talk soon. Bye.